topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show, where we bring you the finest experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Got a great show for the next 50 minutes. This is a very special show because a lot of people don't know a lot about it, and I've got such a surprise for our guest. I was surprised also. Let me introduce you to our expert today, Attorney Michael Mandelbrot. Good morning. Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon, Steve. Thanks for having me on. It's great to see you.
I got to tell you, we promote the show a couple days out, actually yesterday when we were promoting your show, and we're actually promoting it throughout the whole entire United States. We actually got a lot of questions to ask you.
Great. I would love to answer them. Anything you got for me, throw them my way.
Okay, I've got you. And so this is a 50-minute show today, and we're really excited about the show because I could not believe all the questions that we got today from all over the country. So first of all, before we get started, tell people about your firm.
Thank you. Well, I've been representing asbestos victims for about 29 years now, really about 30 years. It is exclusively what I do. It has been my practice. It is something I'm very passionate about. There has been over 100,000 asbestos cases across the country. These companies knew that asbestos was harming victims going back to the 1930s and essentially hid the dangers from the victims. And as a result, now many people are getting diagnosed with a variety of asbestos-related diseases. You hear about mesothelioma, but there's also lung cancer, asbestosis, and a variety of other cancers that are caused by exposure to asbestos. And it has really become, in essence, my passion and my career to help these people and to get them the compensation they deserve.
Hey, Michael, it is so obvious this is your passion. And I got to tell you, we had a couple people wrote us your last show that they were really impressed on how you answer our questions, because a lot of attorneys nowadays, they talk over your head and you're too embarrassed to say, I don't understand what you're saying. So we appreciate the way you break everything down. Let's get started. I'm going to mix in. I've got questions that I've learned from your show, and then I will let you know who wrote us and where they wrote us from. Let's start off with, at a minimum, what is needed to file an asbestos lawsuit or claim?
A question I get from anyone who calls my office. And it is a great question. It really starts with a diagnosis of an asbestos-related disease. So when somebody calls my office, for example, and says, I was in the Navy for 25 years and I'm having a lot of breathing difficulty, I know they had a lot of exposure to asbestos. I know the companies that I would go after if they are diagnosed with an asbestos-related disease. So the first thing I will do, I won't even retain that individual, but I will always investigate their case for free, and that is order a copy of their chest x-ray or their medical reports so I can send those off to an expert to see if they see underlying asbestos disease in the lungs, interstitial fibrosis, a variety of medical terms that I won't get into, asbestosis, scarring of the lungs, things like that, which would lead me to believe that their disease is caused more likely by exposure to asbestos than anything else. It always starts with a diagnosis. If somebody has lung cancer, that alone isn't a qualifying disease. I still need to get their x-ray and see if they have underlying scarring on their lungs caused by asbestos. Chances are I can still get them compensation if they don't, but it is a much, much more valuable and a stronger case if somebody does have those indicia of an asbestos-related disease. So it always starts with a medical diagnosis. And I will say this from the start, I'm not a doctor. I send those, they went to medical school, they're a lot smarter than me in the medicine. And so, I can get an indication maybe whether or not somebody potentially has a case, but it always starts with a diagnosis from a doctor. Diagnosis of asbestos-related disease, asbestosis, lung cancer with underlying disease, colorectal cancer with underlying disease, and of course, the one everyone hears about, mesothelioma, which is diagnosed typically through a pathology report, a biopsy, where they actually test the tissue under a microscope.
If a person has asbestos, do they have to remember where they got it from?
The answer to that question is no. That is a big part of what we do as lawyers. We act often more so as investigators. So, a lot of clients that we speak with, they will always say, hey, I was definitely exposed in the Navy, for example. So, we know, and we would know in advance that they would have been exposed if they were on ships because there's so much asbestos on ships. But what I always have to explain to clients is that we look for every significant exposure. So, for example, if after being in the Navy, for example, somebody worked in a refinery, that would be significant to us because we know that there would be additional exposure through pipes and boilers and other equipment in a refinery. So we typically have to act as investigators and really run through a work and a military history for all our clients. And it's not our client's job to remember 40 years ago the specific products. It's our job to find that out for them. But we always thoroughly interview them so that we can help determine all of the different products that they had exposure to so we can potentially get them the compensation they deserve.
Michael, what if a person has excessive coughing and he actually worked with asbestos? Are they eligible for compensation?
Quite possibly. I got, say, 5 calls like that this week. And so for those people, the first thing I would do, I see that they've got some breathing problems. So me being me, I'm going to get their x-ray and send it off to the expert to see if they see asbestos-related disease. But when I have that person on the phone, I'm also going to interview them. I'm going to look for whether or not they do have a significant exposure to asbestos, because a lot of people will call my office and say, there's asbestos in my apartment and I've lived here for 5 years. That's not significant to me. I'm looking for exposures and the latency between 15 and 20 years or more, meaning they were exposed, say, 1980 or before. So if somebody calls and says, you know, I've had a lot of coughing and I think I had a lot of exposure to asbestos, and they're age 75 and they worked in power plants, refineries, shipyards, or places where I think that I can get them compensation, that is an example of somebody where we will, and we pay for it all, we will send them out a medical release, send it off to an expert, and then if they have a diagnosis, we will talk to them about going forward and doing claims. But we like to try and help anybody. So that's an example of somebody who very well may be eligible for compensation and doesn't know it until they until we get a medical review. I do want to say real quickly, you know, out there, everybody sees their personal physicians, and especially if they've got breathing problems, it's usually a pulmonary expert that they will see, a breathing expert. And anytime somebody from my 30 years of experience in this goes to their pulmonary doctor and has breathing problems, if they ever smoked in their life, their doctors, for some reason, always point to the cigarettes and not the asbestos. That's why I tell people who were diagnosed with COPD or emphysema and they had a lot of exposure to asbestos, call me, because I'm not certain that your doctor's got the diagnosis correct. And the one thing we're really looking for in that situation is their breathing getting worse? Because if they quit smoking, typically the breathing should get better. But if their problems are caused by asbestos, which is a progressive disease and continues to get worse, and if they quit smoking and their breathing still gets worse, then that really is an indication that it's probably caused by asbestos. We can also, with a trained eye, look at these pulmonary function test result scores and determine whether or not problems are more likely caused by smoking versus asbestos. And I'm not confident that personal physicians in the middle of a lot of small towns really have that great understanding.
Wow, that's scary.
It is.
I mean, Michael, you know, one of the things that I noticed, these emails that came in, were almost every one of them were close to the ocean. Like one's from Baltimore, one's from Galveston, a couple from the Southern California area. Why is that?
I don't know for certain. I'm glad that people are emailing, and I'm happy to get their questions. But I've got my belief. My strong belief is this: when these cases started about 30 years ago, they were primarily brought for shipyard workers and Navy personnel. And when you think about it, where were ships being built and where was Navy personnel typically located? On the coast, by the water. And every city you just mentioned to me has major shipbuilding activities. Right? Galveston, Texas.
Yes.
Baltimore, Maryland.
San Diego.
San Diego, Southern California. You know, I can name, 5 shipyards in each one of those places, large shipyards, including military shipyards. Not just, like Newport News Shipyard and Dry Dock. You got Baltimore Shipbuilding. I forget, Curtis Bay Shipyard, which was also in Maryland. In Southern California, you've got Long Beach Naval Shipyard, National Steel and Shipbuilding in San Diego. There is San Diego Naval Shipyard was a huge one. So I think primarily there is a tremendous amount of litigation and activity on the coast. And, a lot of children of people who work in these shipyards are now getting sick as well, because they would have been exposed to asbestos fibers brought home on a shipyard worker or refinery worker's clothes. So that is my sort of uneducated guess, is what I would say.
So, I always, it's amazing. Right before your show, Aaron Brockovich comes up. I watched it again last night for probably the 100th time. Do you find that people are afraid to sue? That they, like, if they're still working, they could lose their job?
That is a great question. And this is what people, I think, out there need to understand. From my experience, the ones that people are very, very concerned about suing, especially if they're still employed, is their employer. They don't want to go after their employer. Right. But the first thing I explain to people is, this is who we do not sue. Your employer. That's a workers' comp case. We don't go after them. We can't sue the Navy or the government. They've got governmental immunity. And then there's morally, oftentimes we may not go after, for example, hospitals, colleges and universities, places like that where potentially we could, and oftentimes we do for the benefit of our clients. I'm not saying they're not sued, but we never can sue an employer. That's a workers' comp lawyer.
Right.
And just so people understand, if somebody's got mesothelioma and they bring a workers' comp claim against their employer, that claim maybe pays a maximum, I think, of $250,000. If somebody's got mesothelioma and retains my office, and we go after the manufacturers, suppliers, and distributors of asbestos products, that case is worth potentially $10 million. And I'm not saying every case is, it's a range, but let's say between $2 and $10 million. And clearly, when somebody says we don't want to have to go after our employer, I tell them, good, because I don't want to go after them either. Yeah.
What is the average hospital or the medical bills that come up when a person's got asbestos?
Well, many of our clients, of course, have a lot of their bills covered by Medicare. If Medicare does cover does cover a patient, thankfully, we as lawyers have worked out a reimbursement schedule with Medicare. So the maximum amount we have to pay if somebody is covered by Medicare, the maximum amount we have to reimburse Medicare out of the settlements is $38,000, which is really a negotiated rate, because I can't give you an exact amount, but if somebody has to go through a very radical surgery, pleurolectomy, where they open them up and they have to peel the lung and there's a long recovery, there could be millions of dollars in medical bills or hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills. Thankfully, most people are covered by either Medicare or their private insurance plan, who we also have to reimburse. But at least it is always far less than the amount. But then, of course, if somebody opts for no treatment, then there's very little medical expenses. It really all depends on the treatment and the care that they get.
So now, if a person does have a case, Michael, how long, I know everybody's case is probably different, but how long does it usually typically take for a case, say, from start to finish?
Well, the question, I guess, is, here, I'm going to give you a better question, and then I'll answer your question, of course. How long before a client starts seeing compensation.
Yes.
The way it works is in these cases is not like, for example, a car accident case where you sue somebody and then you settle and you get one recovery. In these cases, we're going after dozens of different asbestos companies trying to maximize the recovery against each of them. So say, for example, you've got somebody who has lung cancer. They may see their first settlement within a month or two, and it may, be, I don't want to say relatively small, but it might be $6,000, say the first settlement. Then comes the next one, maybe a month later, and then maybe 3 more a month later, and then maybe 2 more a month later, and then maybe 5 more a month later. But the question about when does a case end, it's a really good question, because I like to tell my clients that I never close a case. And the reason is because a lot of the compensation we get for these clients is from these trust funds from bankrupt companies. So when you get an award from a company, every trust has what's known as a payment percentage. So say your award is $10,000 and the trust payment percentage is 20%. You get $2,000 on that claim that you filed. Well, every couple of years, they look at those percentages and determine how much money is left in the fund. Is there enough to pay everybody at this amount? Or should that percentage go up, or should it go down? And if those payment percentages go up, say from 20% to 25%, then all of the old clients who got paid at 20% receive additional money. So I have clients who I haven't gotten a settlement for in 10 years. And then a trust may increase their payment percentage, and all of a sudden I'm sending 75 different clients settlement checks because that trust increased. And clients love it because they don't hear from me for like 5 years. I had their case 20 years ago, and then I might just email them and say, you won't believe it, this trust raised their payment percentage. I just got another $50,000 for you and the family. Just confirm you're at the same address, and then it's on. So we just don't close cases. There's no legitimate reason that I see to close cases. The other reason I don't close cases is because we see this often where we bring a case for somebody who's diagnosed with asbestosis, not a cancer, asbestosis, and say 5-8 years later, they now develop a cancer. That's considered a new disease. I can bring a new case for them. I already have their file. They're already a client. No reason to close their cases as well. So yeah, we keep every case open, unless a client directs us to close a case.
Right. We just got a question. I hope this isn't a silly question. They want to know, is there cures for asbestos?
It's a great question, and it's something I'm surprised we haven't mentioned. And the answer is no. The answer is no. Absolutely.
There's the answer, probably.
There, and that is one why these cases, I take so seriously. Somebody breaks a leg, yes, you can get surgery and hopefully go through rehab and get recovery, and but when somebody has an asbestos-related disease, it's progressive. It's just a question of how quickly it's going to progress. Some progress very slowly, and a lot of people might expire from other things. I don't want to say heart ailments, but other things before the asbestos gets them. And, I just hesitated when I mentioned the heart, because what people need to understand is that asbestos primarily affects the lungs. But when you can't breathe, and this is in every complaint that we file, it affects every part of the body when you can't breathe. So we see a lot of our clients who end up with heart disease and other heart ailments that we know is related to their, we can't bring a new case for them, but we know that those heart problems or diabetes or other things may be caused by their asbestos as opposed to, their lifestyle or other things. So it affects the lungs, as we say, and thus affects all parts of the body. Your circulation's not good, your oxygen levels aren't good, your breathing's not good. It's going to affect all parts of your body.
Wow, this is kind of a cool text, Michael. He said, it's funny that you see all these commercials on TV, but no one ever explains it like your guest is doing. Can you tell me, is there a difference between asbestos and mesothelioma?
There's a difference in the diseases. Asbestosis is not a cancer. Both are caused by asbestos. Both are caused by asbestos. Asbestosis is one disease. Mesothelioma is another. Both are progressive diseases. Both we do consider to be terminal diseases. But mesothelioma, the one you see the commercial for, the one that all the lawyers want the cases, the ones the lawyers will buy off doctors and buy off unions to get these cases, those are the massive cases. Those are a cancer to the lining of the lung, which is terminal on average within 6 months of diagnosis. And so you really only see commercials for mesothelioma, not for asbestosis.
That's right.
But they are absolutely related. And the reason you don't see the commercials for asbestosis is because simply the lawyers who are doing those commercials, they make a lot more money on the mesothelioma cases. And while they hold themselves out as somebody for victims of asbestos disease, they're really not. They're out. What they are is out for, I think it's greed, but only out for victims of mesothelioma.
Here's a text from Rex. Is there any out-of-pocket money when you file a claim?
Never. We have not sent out a bill in 30 years, Rex. And all lawyers who handle these cases, or as far as I know, handle them on a contingency. So they put up all the money, they pay all of the expenses, they pay all of the doctors. And like I said, for me, if you don't have a case, then I'll just eat that cost. I haven't sent out a bill in 30 years. So you might ask, oh, how do you make money, Mike? We make money if we're able to get our clients compensated. And then typically it's 1/3. And I will say this, a lot of lawyers out there, especially those mesothelioma lawyers, they have fee contracts where they take 40 or 45% of the settlement monies. That's too much.
Wow, that's a lot.
Mine is 1/3, and I know it's the lowest in the country. Okay, and I think that's fair. So we put up all the money. There's never any out-of-pocket expenses. And the way we get compensated is that if we are successful in getting new settlements, like for example, if we got a $3,000 settlement, $1,000 would be due to us. $300,000, $100,000, and we'd send out $200,000 to the client. And that's the thing. Some of these cases we handle, I might make $500 on the case, and it's as much work as a lung cancer or a mesothelioma case, but that's okay because I know that that client in the middle of Wyoming or in the middle of Florida, typically from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, that $1,500 or that $2,000 check, that means something to them. Hopefully not a trip to the casino, but it definitely means something to him.
What if, let me ask you, so if you settle out of court, is it the same fee as if you have to go to court?
Well, for us, it is. And again, that's a great question, Steve, because I don't know why it should ever change, and it never does for my office. But I do know other lawyers who have a 40% fee contract, and then they say, if we go to trial, then it would go up to 50%, which to me is ridiculous because, first of all, it doesn't say if you go to trial. What the fee contract usually says is if you get a trial date, it goes up to 50% for the lawyer, which is far too much. And what we as lawyers know, but most clients don't know, and very few lawyers will tell them, is you usually get a trial date about 9 months before you go to trial. So these lawyers are bumping up their fee when they get a trial date. A fee contract should never change, and that's advice for anybody out there. If a lawyer is handling the case on contingency, they've got what's known as skin in the game. Okay, they're putting up the money for the case, and they've got skin in the game. They've got enough incentive at 1/3. Okay, they don't need 50%. You're the client. You're the victim. You deserve far more of the money than the lawyer.
Wow, it's just, you're like a breath of fresh air, Michael.
I know I'm different than other lawyers. That's
you
what's
are.
scary.
But that's why you've been around for so long.
I guess, but maybe why I'm not, I don't have a private helicopter jet or own baseball teams like some of these other guys. And then just if you didn't know that, Peter Angelos, who just, I believe they just sold they did just sell the Baltimore Orioles. He made all of his money from asbestos litigation. He was a lawyer like me. What's that?
He's in Baltimore.
Right, the Baltimore Orioles. So he just actually passed away. His children ended up selling the baseball team. He ran it for 30 years. And at the same time he was running it, he was running his law firm, handling these asbestos cases. They were actually a client of mine about 10, 15 years ago, where they would send me a bunch of cases to handle in California for them. So yeah, it's amazing. But yeah, I'm not one of them, but I am like them in that we both represent victims of asbestos diseases.
Well, if you've been listening to the show long enough, Michael is somewhat of a baseball fan. And I have to ask this, Michael, because I thought about it. I know that President Trump is trying to get Pete Rose into the Hall of Fame. Do you think that's ever going to happen? He wants to pardon him and then try to get him into the Hall of Fame.
Well, it's a great question, and I think there's been there's a lot of people in the Hall of Fame who have been morally, ethically, and probably criminally improper. I grew up in Detroit. I grew up in Detroit, where my grandfather used to talk about Ty Cobb, who I heard was one of the biggest racists of all time.
I didn't know that.
And so that's just what I heard from growing up in Detroit. He's in the Hall of Fame. And really, that O.J. Simpson is in the football Hall of Fame.
That's right.
And I think what these people did was a lot worse. I think Pete Rose, during his lifetime, often was his own worst enemy. First he lied about what he did, and then he never really, throughout the course of his life, had a lot of remorse. But growing up watching the Game of the Week with Joe Garagiola and Tony Kubek, and seeing Pete Rose smack the ball.
Pee Wee Reese.
Yeah. You're going back a little further than me.
Oh,
I'm more like Steve Garvey and
oh,
you know,
okay.
and the Dodgers. So yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's going to be interesting. Trump's doing a lot of things, let's just say, that are going to be interesting. People
Yeah.
are. It's polarizing a tremendous amount of people, but all I can say is we did need some change. And I'm not saying all the change is good or bad, but we need some change. And to know that the best hitter in baseball um, was banned for life and couldn't be in
Yes.
the Hall of Fame, yeah, I'm okay with a little change. So,
Did you ever hear that? We know he bet on games, but did you ever hear that he only betted on games to win, not to lose? We're talking about Cincinnati now.
yeah, I did hear that. So, what it was, okay, he did bet on baseball, but he would
Yes.
only bet on the Reds to win. And he bet on
Yes.
other games going on as well. He'd only bet on the Reds to win. The one
Okay.
thing I don't know, it's funny because I think at one point someone actually produced like the gambling books of all his bets. The over-unders, I'm wondering, what was
Right.
he? If he bet, was he also betting over unders on his team? Because then you put in a bad pitcher because you want to get a few more runs, or your pitcher doesn't have. That's the one I don't know. But you're right. If he's at least he wasn't betting against his team. I mean, you look at gambling obviously has exploded out there. It's exploded around the country. DraftKings, ESPN Bet, all of these
Yes.
things. And you look at what happened last year with Toronto Raptor player Jonte Porter.
Yes.
He got, I mean, he was an active NBA player who was actually fixing his performance to enhance bets. Now that is as bad as it gets.
Yes.
Okay, he was actually playing back, like leaving the game. Hey, my eye hurts. I can't see out there. I
Right.
mean, that to me, that's bad. That's bad. I don't think he should deserve reinstatement to the NBA at some point. I don't think he can be trusted. P. Rose, especially post mortem, we can throw him in the Hall of Fame. We
I
can
agree
throw
with
him in
you.
there.
I had to get that in. Here, Julian, speaking of Baltimore, here's Julian in Baltimore. He wrote in, where in the home may asbestos hazard be found?
Great questions. The first thing I would ask if I was concerned about having asbestos in my home is what year was my home built? Homes built after 1975 are a lot less likely to have asbestos in them. Homes built before 1975 are much more likely to have them in them. Homes built from 1950 to 1975, the very, very common products that we often see: popcorn ceilings,
I remember that.
drywall and joint compound was a big one. Okay, drywall and joint compound, especially in the garages, the firewalls, the fire rated drywalls, vinyl asbestos tile or linoleum flooring. You might remember the squares in the bathroom. They were in every school in America.
Yes.
They were just not 8x8, 9x9, or 12x12 tiles that they basically put an asbestos mastic down and then put those down. Those ones to me are a tough one because how do you ever get those out of your house?
Yeah.
I mean,
Really.
you've got to, without making them dusty, it's almost impossible. Those are some of the big ones. And then like inside the walls on the ducting, the hot water pipes typically had some insulation, some duct insulation. that's very likely. And then under the house, and this is a massive one, and these are defendants who we go after a lot, are companies that made what we call transite pipe, but it's an asbestos cement pipe that was used for sewer and water pipes. It was used in, almost every home before they went to PVC piping for water pipe. So those are the big ones I can think of. Flooring, roofing materials, of course, that shake roof and shingle roof. I mentioned that transite pipe, transite siding was used as well on the outside of homes. Now, also in the 1960s and 70s, stucco. You'd see, especially in Southern California, you see a tremendous amount of homes with stucco. That had a lot of asbestos in it as well. And then I mentioned 50 to 70 because drywall and joint compound primarily came into use in the 1950s and 60s. And before that, it was plaster that walls were made with primarily. And while there wasn't asbestos in the plaster itself, what we have found is it would be pumped through a system, but the asbestos allowed it to pump a lot smoother. So as the plasterers described it, we would put a coffee can, a coffee can of asbestos in the plaster mix. So that was something as well. So possible to plaster walls as well. Lots of different products.
Roman wants to know, Roman's from Galveston, wants to know, can you identify asbestos?
Good question. I'd like to think after 30 years, my eye is relatively trained, I can tell if something was installed prior to 1980. But truly, no, you can't from the naked eye. If you're walking on a ship and you see a ship that was built in the 1950s and it has off-white or grayish colored insulation that's very dusty, you can almost assume it's asbestos. But really, it's something that has to be determined under a microscope. It takes a microscopic analysis. And that's one of the things is, I heard it was 20 times finer than a human hair, an asbestos fiber. So you and I could be sitting in a room right now where asbestos fibers are floating, but we don't see them because they are so fine. I don't know, 5 microns or something. But again, it takes more of a microscopic analysis to determine. I'd like to think generally, hey, if that was put in the 1960s and it's drywall and it's joint compound and it's flooring material and it's insulation, 99% chance it had asbestos. Why? Asbestos was an unbelievable insulator. And so companies were putting it in their products, everything in the home and on ships, factories, power plants, refineries, gaskets, boilers, pumps, you name it, because there was no better insulator at the time. Well, there was better, but it was more expensive. And so that's why it was used primarily in so many products.
Michael, you've seen people who have this asbestos, this cancer. You've seen how sick they get. What do you do? How do they go to trial?
I do see how sick they get, and I only hesitate for a second because I got an email this morning, like I get quite often, that my client Noel Clark passed away. And Noel Clark was somebody who lived in Campbell, California. His case hasn't gone to trial yet. And he had laryngeal cancer caused by asbestos. He worked at a plant that made asbestos cement pipe, and he worked at Westinghouse. And I could only communicate with Noel by paper. He couldn't even talk with a voice box. So I went out to Campbell, California and met with him, and it was writing notes back and forth. And I knew that he was seriously sick. I'm actually happy that I was able to get him compensation before he passed away, and he was able to make sure that, you know, he left knowing that he could take care of some of the people that he really wanted to take care of. But, you know, it's something that can potentially happen at any time in all of our cases. And we try to get these cases to trial as quickly as possible. We can get these cases expedited and jumped in front of, you know, a car accident case and a slip and fall case because these clients are usually terminally ill.
Right.
But even when we get them expedited, it's still 6 months out. And so we always we try and get them expedited so we can get these clients to trial. In the course of working up the case for trial or in litigating the case before trial, we always take a videotape deposition. So if our clients expire, this is probably how I should have answered your question. We always have a videotape deposition in these cases. So if our clients are too sick or expire before trial, they pass away, we've got a videotape of them that we can show to the jury. Obviously, with Mr. Clark and having him, we don't have a videotape of him. But yes, most clients, especially trial cases, we get a videotape trial testimony of them, which is played to the jury in case that client can't make it to trial. Thanks for asking.
How do people get in touch with your office?
1-800-970-DUST. 1-800-970-DUST is our call center. Direct to my office, 415-895-5175. Email Mandelbrot, Mandelbrot at asbestoslegalcenter, just as it sounds, .org. And I really appreciate you asking, Steve. People, you can call me directly anytime. And, you know, I want to be a little bit unlike other lawyers. My cell number, 415-307-2119. Call me. If you got questions, give me a call.
If you missed any part of today's show, we'll be running this again in 2 weeks from today. Michael, thank you so much. We will see you next week with your next live.
All right, Steve. Always great to see you. See you soon.
Good talking to you, buddy.
Take
That's
care
attorney now. Michael Mandelbrot. That's it for us today. Thank you, Juan. Great job as always. We'll be back again with you next Friday with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Experts show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.